Because you see, whenever we get into anything personal, we have duality, we have two-ness, we have otherness. In other words, we have trouble. So, it has to be completely impersonal. Now, this ultimate absolute is the boundless, indivisible, absolute truth. Infinite, boundless. If any personal sense were to enter into the absolute truth, it would mean division, separation, duality. Thus it could not be the impersonal, inseparable, absolute truth. Now Jesus was well aware of the necessity for the absolute truth to be and to remain completely impersonal. I don't believe that anyone has ever been as well aware of the necessity for impersonality in this absolute truth as Jesus. I don't believe it. Now he makes this fact very clear as reported in the 11th chapter of Matthew. Now he was speaking to the multitude concerning John. Now when John came before the people, trying to tell them that the living Christ was here, was visible here, and that this Christ was manifested as the one they called Jesus. But obviously John did not make a very impressive appearance, if you recall, that is, as a person. Now, here's a quote. And the same John had his raiment of camel's hair, and a leathern girdle about his loins, and his meat was locusts and wild honey. Now that's Matthew 3:4. Are you all hearing me? Yes. Fine. Now Jesus was very well aware of the fact that the multitude judged John by what seemed to be his personal appearance. He knew they were considering John as a separate person, but Jesus knew better. He knew that the one they called John was the indivisible, infinite consciousness, focalized. And he also knew that this consciousness was proclaiming the presence of the impersonal, living Christ, which is the only man, the forever living, infinite Christ, is the only man there is, that's capital M. Now Jesus attempted to enlighten the people as to the impersonal Christ consciousness as manifested by the one they call John. Now here he says, and as they departed, Jesus began to say unto the multitude concerning John, well, what went ye out into the wilderness to see? What went ye out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? But what went ye out for to see? A man clothed in soft raiment? Behold, they that wear soft clothing are in kings' houses. Now that's Matthew 11:7 and 8. Jesus knew the multitudes were considering John as a separate, born man, and they were judging him from the standpoint of their own sense of separateness. I'd like to say that again. Now, Jesus knew that the multitudes were considering John as a separate born man. And of course, the reason they were doing this is that they were judging John from their own sense of separateness or duality. But Jesus, the ever-present Christ, knew and knows that every man in existence is the one inseparable Christ consciousness, which is God being the Christ consciousness, which is God being. Now the one infinite, indivisible Christ consciousness cannot be separated into a so-called born person. Can you imagine? Can you imagine? The one God consciousness being separated into one tiny little spot called a born man? This is ridiculous, isn't it? Indeed so. Now the one infinite, indivisible Christ consciousness cannot be separated into the so-called person. You see, because this Christ consciousness really is God being conscious. That's why. There's no such thing as a separate born person. You know, I always run into trouble when I make that statement. Everybody loves to hear that there's no death, but hardly anyone wants to hear that there's no birth. But until we are willing to accept the fact that there is no birth, there's no use to say there's no death. Is there really? Now the one infinite, indivisible Christ consciousness cannot be separated. Now there is another fact that Jesus knew and knows concerning John. He knew that John was the same Christ consciousness that he, Jesus, was. He knew that John was the same Christ consciousness, and equally that Christ consciousness that he, Jesus, was. The other day I was in contemplation, and it came through, well, no wonder, you know, the disciples questioned when Jesus washed their feet. Well, hadn't they washed Jesus' feet? Was he going to put himself on a platform? No, he wasn't going to set himself up. He knew too much. He was too much love, too impersonal. He knew that John was the same Christ consciousness that he knew when John recognized the Christ that was and is Jesus. Now John was simply perceiving the Christ that was the genuine and only consciousness of the one called Jesus. Now, in order that this symposium completely fulfill its purpose in and as the experience of each one of us, let us bring the truths revealed in the foregoing episode right into our own revelatory experience. It's no good having these, hearing these words. It's no good having these revelations unless these revelations are our own experience. No. It takes the experience every time. Now let us ask ourselves, how many consciousnesses are there in this room? Just one. Now, are there any separate consciousnesses here? No. Then is not the one indivisible Christ consciousness equally present here as each and every one of us in this room? Is there anyone in this room more the Christ consciousness than the one who sits next or the one who sits here? Is there anyone in this room any less the complete Christ consciousness? There is no more. There is no less. There's only the one complete Christ consciousness, which is God being conscious. No sacrilege. Just absolute truth. Of course not. Well, very well then. There is no separate person here at all. Sounds shocking, doesn't it? But there isn't. There is no separate person. This doesn't mean that there are not identities here. Heavens, there are identities. Jesus was and is an identity. Each one of us is an identity. But it's a different thing to be an identity than it is to imagine that you're a person, that we are persons. There's not even one person here or anywhere, for that matter, who is a separate being. Now then, if you see someone here in front of you, and you consider this one to be more of the Christ consciousness than you are, put it out right away, please, in order that you be really the full open consciousness that you are, in order that everything that goes on here, every word that's spoken, will fulfill its purpose. Who speaks the word? You do. Who hears the word? I do. Who speaks the word? I do. Who hears the word? You do. It's all the same thing. There is no one here but the one full, complete Christ consciousness. You are, now if you should seem to see someone here other than the Christ that you are, you're seeming to see a separate person, that you are seeming to see and to judge from the standpoint of supposedly born man. Thus, you're limiting yourself. To do this is always to limit yourself. Now, is this clear as far as we've gone? If there are any questions about this, just write them and leave them, and we'll discuss them, see what consciousness reveals on them. Now, in order to really see anyone, we must see from the birthless Christ I am standpoint. I'd like to repeat that. Would you like? In order to really see anyone, we must see from the birthless Christ I am standpoint. There's no other way to see anyone. And when you do, you see light, you see beauty, you see absolute perfection. You see the glory that is God, not only revealed but manifested. Then you're really seeing. That's the only way I can see at all. Otherwise I would not see. Oh, I love you so much. I'm so grateful to be here with you and for you to be here with me as one consciousness. And I am so aware of what this symposium is to mean in and as the lives not only of you who are here, but of countless ones who are sincerely seeking, that I can hardly contain myself. This is a fact, truly. No, we do not judge anyone. In order to really see anyone, as I say, we have to see from the Christ consciousness standpoint. And we can only see from this standpoint when we perceive that the one we are seeing is the very same and equally the same Christ consciousness that we are. Never look at anyone and say, oh, he or she is a wonderful Christ consciousness, and leave yourself out. This is what I'm getting at here, you see. Hence, we do not judge anyone. We do not judge by any appearance of separation. We do not consider anyone to be a person. We do not look up to anyone. Neither do we look down upon anyone. We simply accept the glorious fact that we are all equally one indivisible Christ consciousness. We have to be this consciousness, for there is no other us to be. Either we are this Christ consciousness, or we're not even conscious of being. Now, beloved, we can joyously say, I live, I am alive, yet not I, a little personal I. It is the infinite, indivisible God, Christ consciousness that is alive right here and right now. It's a wonderful thing to realize what we are, all of us, every one of us in this room. It is the infinite, eternal, ever-living Christ that lives as the I that I am. Who's saying this? Who is saying this? You? Good. All of us. That's right. I am conscious, yet not I. It is the infinite, inseparable Christ consciousness that is consciously aware of being right here and now. I am intelligent, yet not I. It is the infinite, all-knowing Christ conscious mind, intelligence, knowing itself to be all absolute truth, knowing itself to be the everlasting Christ consciousness right here and now. And last but not least, I love, yet not I. It is the infinite, tender Christ love that loves impersonally all that it sees, all that it knows. It is the inseparable Christ love, equally present, infinitely and eternally. You see, nothing loves but love. That's all that can love. You see, love is alive. It's a living substance. Without love, there's no life. Now, so far as we've gone, is it clear? I'm grateful. Now we'll go on to our next subject, which is the eternality of every identity. Now, as I told you, we are going to, you'll find this will be practical. And we're getting into something that seems to be quite an issue in our nation today, and there must be the attention to it. Now, throughout our nation, as it appears to be today, there is much concern. Yes, there's even alarm about the riotous and rebellious and resentful so-called young people. Now, I'm going to speak as though I were a so-called born being, but thank heavens I'm not. Actually, no one is. But in order to quickly clarify this entire seeming situation, I shall speak in the words ordinarily used by so-called born man. Now, it is assuredly, it will sound dual, but you will know better. You will understand that it is only for the moment, and that it is necessary to speak in this way in order to arrive at the absolute truth concerning this seeming situation. There's only one way that this can be seen for these blessed ones called our young people. There's just one way, and this came through for us here, and perhaps it's our job. Now, every identity is supposed to be a temporary born identity. Now, the body of each identity is assumed to be a temporary body produced or created by other born bodies called mother and father. Those so-called, those called mother and father, who are the most concerned about these rebellious so-called young people. And this is understandable. They simply cannot understand why they should be this way. Sometimes they say, well, I've done everything for this child. You know, that kind of thing. Now, many reasons have been set forth as to why these youngsters, some of them from good, what they call good, stable religious homes, should act in this way. But all the explanations for this behavior or misbehavior are based upon the opinions of supposedly born man. You see this? Every explanation is based upon supposedly born man. Well, you're not going to get any right answers based on that kind of a proposal. No one is. Now, and that's the premise for these opinions is false, because born human beings are not genuine. The premise of all these explanations being false, it naturally follows that the conclusions also have to be false. You got a false premise, you're going to have a false conclusion. Now, we hear much about the generation gap. For instance, the mothers and fathers are considered by the youngsters to be too old to understand them and their viewpoints. Then the mothers and fathers consider the children to be too young and inexperienced to understand their more mature, educated and experienced viewpoints. Then there are some who blame the parents, saying that they have spoiled the children, that they've been too permissive. Oh, these and many other explanations as to why these youngsters are misbehaving are being considered. Now, from the human standpoint, these explanations are reasonable and valid. And from this standpoint, all efforts to solve the problem are commendable, all right. But the problem has never been understood. Nor can it be understood, as we said, from the merely human standpoint. Now, since it is not understood, how can it be solved from the born man's, if it cannot be understood from the born man's standpoint, how can it be solved from the born man's standpoint? It can't. So, it can't be, and it won't be solved until it is understood from the one and only standpoint there is, which is the eternal, birthless, ageless, deathless standpoint. This is the only way we're going to see through this thing. It is from the standpoint of eternality that the eternal, beginningless, endless identity is perceived. So now let us go to the very absolute truth concerning these boys and girls, and let us see why they appear to be so naughty. Inherently, each and every one of us knows, we know something. If we didn't know that we really were eternal, we wouldn't try to live as long as we can. That isn't all. The doctors wouldn't try to keep us alive as long as they can. So, inherently, each and every one of us knows that we are eternal and eternal identity. Many of us are quite aware that we have always been and will forever be, and that we're never going to end being because we never began to be.
I hope you enjoy this spiritual audio. Like, share and subscribe for more.